Hello, my name is Nikki Fry. I work for Utah State University Extension as Extension Assistant Professor in Wildlife Biology. I'll be talking to you about greater sage-grouse management in the Alton-Sink Valley, Fort Pasture, Scutumpa projects that were funded by the Bureau of Land Management. This is a recording of a presentation entitled Connectivity in a Fragmented Landscape that was presented to the Western Agency's Grouse Workshop in Elko, Nevada in June 2014. Managing sage-grouse in Utah is challenging from a biological and a land management standpoint. The vegetation and landscape changes dramatically from north to south. What you see here is a picture of Utah, and there are two overlays of the sage steppe maps of sagebrush habitat types, namely the Wyoming big sagebrush and mountain big sagebrush habitat types. In the north, you can see that the habitat is fairly contiguous. There are large expanses of both types of sagebrush habitats within the area. As you move south, you get into what we consider less typical habitat, habitat that people don't usually think of when they think of sage-grouse. Here, using the same scale and the same habitat types, you can see that there is smaller patches of mountain and Wyoming big sagebrush. There's a lot less connectivity, and there's just a lot more non-suitable habitat. And so we're looking at habitat that needs to be managed for connectivity and redundancy to ensure stable sage-grouse populations. This habitat management study, the population study that we're doing on greater sage-grouse in southern Utah, is located right here in Garfield and Kane counties. It encompasses several leks in southern Utah. And in fact, that screenshot in the bottom right-hand corner is of the study area. Within the Panguitch management area that encompasses this study, there are 343,000 acres of sage-grouse habitat. The habitat is of variable connectivity, and within that we're studying four what we consider strong leks in the Panguitch corridor. This corridor is created by Highway 89 running north to south. The leks are generally smaller in size than what you would see in other areas of sage-grouse habitat. In the Sink Valley, let me find my pointer here. In the Sink Valley, average tenure is for 6 attending males. As we move north to Hoyt's Ranch, the tenure average is 26 attending males. In Hatch, our tenure average is around 10. For Sage and Hollow, our largest lek is about 80. And then we have some offshoot leks that we aren't technically studying per se, but there's a possibility that they might be connected. We're not sure. This would be the Johns Valley lek. This is Bryce Canyon City right here. And then this is what we consider the East Bench lek. And the East Bench has about 12 attending males on a 10-year average. Past research was conducted in Alton, the town of Alton, which is right here, from 2005 to 2010 using VHF telemetry. From this data, we know that the birds are associated with Alton displayed two basic habitat use strategies. Most birds spent the whole year in the same valley, so really spending their whole lifetime in this general area here, while some birds actually flew north to Hoyt's Ranch and spent some of their summers in this area, flying back to this area in the fall and winter, which is about 12 kilometers away. We were concerned with the birds in Alton because of the limited connectivity, and again, here's an inset of the habitat that you can expect in this area. And as of now, as of today, the Alton Sink Valley Lek represents the southernmost lek in the greater sage-grouse distribution. So any loss of connectivity, any loss of this lek would be a loss of the ability to adjust to environmental variabilities, and would limit the greater sage-grouse population's abilities to bounce back from human activities and human disturbance. From our past research, we knew that if we increase corridors among suitable habitat types for different seasonal needs, the birds in Alton would increase their movements to Hoyt's Ranch. One landowner actually did increase a corridor, or open up a corridor right here in around 2009-2010, and we almost immediately saw sage-grouse using this area. So we began to wonder in the Color Country Local Working Group if we could create a population of meta-populations that encourage genetic transfer and provide a buffer from environmental variability. The vision of our local working group, which we've called Dustin's Dream, as a nod to our game biologist there, was to conduct habitat treatments that would increase sage-grouse habitat and create a chain of habitat throughout this entire corridor. And our hypothesis was that if we created this chain, we might find that this whole corridor could be genetically connected, with birds transferring among leks as needed and as environmental variability required them to do. So of course, the first thing we had to figure out was, are the birds connected? And if they are connected, where are those corridors? Which populations are connected? Which ones are not? Where are the corridors? What are the prominent movement directions? We need to know where the different birds from each lek went. Did they stay in the area? Did they move to other leks where there's prominent seasonal habitat patterns? And then from this information, we can get an idea of where those important corridors might be. We could highlight where the corridors are lacking or in jeopardy, and facilitate strengthening of corridors that were weakening. We could look at areas where connectivity may have been lost, look at what the limiting factors are, and try to increase these movement patterns. So in essence, we're really creating a targeted management strategy using GPS data. We started deploying satellite PTT transmitters in the spring of 2012. We were looking to get both sexes, although we were a little bit nervous about getting hens. There's not a lot of data out there about the effect of these transmitters on hens. We set up the data to acquire locations every 6 hours on a 24-hour rotation. In addition, opportunistically, we got Argos locations, Doppler radar locations, and we're incorporating that data into our regulated time data set using the high quality location classes, which translates into Doppler locations with a low error associated with them. Additionally, we had a technician to ground truth odd movements, long distance movement patterns, sudden movements in a time when we didn't expect there to be movements, strange habitat locations such as roosting in the middle of a patch of juniper or a cliff or something that we wouldn't expect. In our first year, 2012, we were just trying to figure out, how to put those transmitters on and try to figure out logistics. We actually tracked only one male. In 2013, we were able to get a few more transmitters out. You can see here the numbers on what we got where. We had 2 hens and 2 males in the Sink Valley Lek, 1 male off the Hoyt's Ranch Lek. We didn't really target the hatch bench lek just because there were only a few males there, and we really thought that there was already this connectivity based on what we had seen from the 1 male that we had in 2012. So we had this 1 male from 2012, and we put on 2 more transmitters on birds in 2013 in this area. So for a total of 2 females, 6 males over 3 leks. So the data that we're going to go over today represents approximately 2,500 locations, 1 bird that we've been tracking for 15 months, and 7 birds that we were tracking for less than 3 months. Essentially, we put the transmitters out in the spring of 2013, and I presented this data in the middle of June of 2013. So we've got everything from the date the bird was deployed through May 30th of 2013. You can see here this, the map of the locations for just that 1 bird that we had 15 months worth of data on. The lines, the purple lines, are the actual movements from one location to the next, so every 6 hours. And I have directional arrows to show you what direction that bird was going. And you can see that it spent much of, this is the lek, so this is the Seychen Hollow lek. So it obviously spent a lot of its time at the Seychen Hollow lek. It did move down to Hoyt's Ranch, spend some time in that lek, and then the hatch lek, and then over into this pocket of habitat where it spent most of the summer, and then popped over back up to Seychen Hollow where it spent its winter and left its Seychen Hollow again this spring. I want you to keep your eye on this lek, the Hoyt's Ranch lek south of Hatch. I really consider it a hinge point for this corridor population, and you'll see why when we look at the rest of the photos. Here you can see the locations for bird 126-206. I took the lines off of it just for visual appearances so we weren't so confused. 126-206 is that bird that I just showed you that had 15 months worth of data. So it can get pretty crazy if we put all of his movements on there. For the 3 birds that we had in the northern half of our study area during the study period, I'm calling them 202, 204, and 201, you can see that the movement off of the lek where we captured them does not go in any one direction, in that it is not predictable that the Seychen Hollow birds will move in any one direction. Remember that bird 206 moved here. Now we have bird 201 that didn't really move anywhere. It stayed put. We have 204 that moved someplace new for us, and that is over here by the Panguitch Lake area. That is a movement that we had never documented before. And then another movement that we had never documented before was to this lek, East Bench. If you'll recall, East Bench was one of the smaller leks that we had thought about but didn't really think that these birds were using. We thought East Bench was more correlated to Johns Valley and the Parker Mountain wildlife management area. If we look at the southern half, so remember Hoyt's Ranch, sorry, the red dot's kind of in the wrong place on this one. Hoyt's Ranch is right here. Again, I told you that was that hinge point, that 206. Here's 206 locations in that area for this year. We look at the Sink Valley lek. Here you can see that we had a female, which is, you can barely see it, it's 953. This female stayed around the lek. 972 is another female that actually we trapped off the Sink Valley lek. It moved up to the Hoyt's Ranch lek and then came back down again. And then we have the male 973, which has stayed around this area with some offshoots back and forth. Interestingly enough, this long distance location right here occurred overnight during a snowstorm. So it looks like this bird, 973, like to move down towards the Ford pasture Scudapaw area during winter storms, which is great information to have because we have hypothesized that these birds do use the Ford pasture Scudapaw area in winter. Another thing that I would like to talk about while we're on this slide is the Alton coal mine. Alton coal mine is actually right here. The reason why it's not showing up on the map is because the sage-grouse locations actually completely cover it. 2 of our males were actually captured just below the spoil pile, the tailings pile of the coal mine on the west side of the mine. All of our birds were trapped within a mile, more likely within a half a mile of the mine. And over the course of June, which is not presented on this data, we did have a hen nest within a half a mile to a mile of this mine, and then hatch her chicks and is now found on the east side of the mine. So she has moved with her chicks around to the other side of the mine. So it appears that the birds are using the area directly adjacent to the mine that they historically used during our 2005 to 2010 study. So that is actually good news, something that I wasn't expecting to see, but I'm happy to notice. Here is a table of some of the metrics that I was able to calculate just through these movements. And you can see here the average distance moved in kilometers per 6 hours. Remember, I get 4 locations a day, so that's every 6 hours. We only had 3 birds that we had for the entire month of March that I used for this calculation, but those birds moved an average of 2.25 kilometers every 6 hours. By April, we're seeing lesser movements, smaller movements every 6 hours. So the birds are settling down into their early summer habitat. They found where they needed to be and they've stayed there. Some other interesting information on this table. We have one bird 206, that's the bird that we have 15 months worth of data on. He is definitely a mover. Moved 19 kilometers within a 6-hour period. And interestingly enough, this was during the day, so that was during the 6 a.m. to noon time period. In April, 206 also had the largest distance moved, which would be about 16 kilometers. And again, this was during the day. And in fact, this was during a 1-hour time period. So between noon and 1 p.m., bird 206 moved 16 kilometers. And this movement was actually between the Sage Hen Hollow Lek down to the Hoyt's Ranch Lek within that 1-hour time period. In May, 206 had settled down, and it was actually 972, a different bird that was still moving around in May with a maximum distance moved of 9 kilometers. And again, this movement was during the day. So take-home message here is that the birds do move quite a bit. Any one bird can have large movement distances, but those maximum distance moved in a time frame are generally decreasing as we get into the summer months. Interesting to me was that a lot of these movements are occurring during the full of the day. I had a thought that they would be moving more in the 6 a.m. time period or the evening time period. So we're seeing birds moving quite a bit during the day. And while these movements are large, they're not technically outside what one could expect. They're not usual, they're not common, but they're within expectation. So just to help those of you that are familiar with the area get a grasp on what these movements are looking like, here are the connectivities we found just during the spring time frame, and we may pick up more as the year progresses. But just during that spring breeding season, the connectivities we found, again, we were able to corroborate the Outen to Hoyt's Ranch. That's about a 20-kilometer distance. We picked up this new connectivity between Hoyt's Ranch and Hatch, and that would be 10 kilometers. It's also between 8 and 10 kilometers between Sagehand Hollow and Hatch, which is a connection that we had picked up in 2012. This new connection that we picked up in 2013 for bird 206, 15 kilometers between the Sagehand Hollow Lek down to Hoyt's. So again, this is what I'm really thinking of, is this hinge point where the birds from the south can come up north, the birds from the north are coming south, and sort of the hinge point. The birds don't stay here. They move out again once the breeding season is over, but they all are using this. And then this new connection we've discovered here between Sagehand Hollow and East Bench. Again, this is one that was hypothesized as possible, not one that we thought was probable. It is a longer movement, a 25-kilometer movement to get between those two leks. I do want you to notice that the grouse are finding pockets of habitat. So to bring home this idea that we do have fragmented habitat, we do have smaller habitat patches, but the birds are able to find them. If you can just look at these movements, they are going from habitat patch to habitat patch. If you were to zoom in closely and look at any one of these movements, there are very few locations that aren't in some sort of sagebrush habitat type. Unfortunately, our black sagebrush habitat type isn't really showing up very well in this map. I know that we have a lot of it, but it's really not showing up so well. But it is down in here. These areas that look like they're not in a habitat are actually the black sagebrush habitat. So what does that all mean? How can we use that for a targeted management approach? Well, we've confirmed connectivity. We know that these birds are mixing with each other, so that's really great on a genetic standpoint. We do know that they are hopping from suitable habitat to suitable habitat. They're capable of finding these small habitat patches. Whether they're fragmented or connected, the birds are able to find them. We still need to figure out if there is any connectivity over into Johns Valley. And this winter, we're hoping to determine whether and to what extent the sage grouse are using the Scudapaw Terrace and Ford's pasture area, which is one of the driving forces behind the project. We just haven't had the time to answer that question yet. So what we need to do to use this information effectively is to make their movements successful by increasing their habitat. And we need to identify and ensure that they have the corridors that they need. More and more we understand that the sage grouse have these micro habitat variables that they're choosing, things that we may not see with our naked eye, some things we may not understand, but it allows them to adjust to environmental variability, whether it's a drought year, it's a wet year, it's a heavy snow year or a low snow year. They can make those small shifts in their habitat use over time. Unfortunately, our habitat is small habitat patches, not large habitat patches. So we need to ensure that we have the redundancy of habitat types, several different patches of brood rearing habitat, close to several different patches of fall and winter habitat, so that the birds don't have to make long distance movements. There shouldn't be any need for a bird to travel 25 kilometers to get where he needs to go or she needs to go. But the good news is that we do have that environmental cushion. We do have that ability for the sage grouse to move where they need to be. Our next step with this data is to make sure that we're they have a direct path. They have a safe path, that when they do make these movements, they're making movements in a safe way through habitat that is safe for them. So whatever decision to move they're using, it's a safe choice. This picture shows you the success we can have by creating habitat, by opening up adjacent habitat, or by creating corridors. This is a picture of before and after of Sink Valley treatment in 2005. You can see here we did have an encroachment of piñons and junipers that was fairly thick. It created small pockets of sagebrush surrounded by these large expanses of trees. It essentially blocked brood rearing and breeding habitat from the summer habitat. So they had to either move through these trees or fly over these trees to get from where they needed to be in March to where they needed or wanted to be in May. So the BLM came in and removed those trees, mulched them, reseeded the area, and 2 years later it looked like this. So this is the exact same location before and after. So we see healthier, more vibrant sagebrush that was left behind. So you can see here's before sagebrush, after sagebrush. And you can see that there's some grasses moving in, there's forbs moving in. It was just a healthier environment. 2 years later, you can't even see the mulch. It's just filled back in with the heavy forbs and shrub component that's necessary for that area. So not only did they create contiguous habitat of a certain habitat type, but they also opened up a corridor from habitat that they knew that they were using to habitat that they knew they were using in the next season. So it served a double purpose. Just another picture here to illustrate what I mean. When I say that we're focusing on maintaining corridors, even those small ones, and that redundancy of habitat. Here, in a lot of our situations down in the South, for example, we start with this winter habitat. There's no redundancy of habitat, of the winter habitat. So if that winter habitat is all of a certain age class, it may or may not be suitable from year to year. Whereas if we could go in, let's go back down there. Whereas if we can go in and create a different age class of winter habitat, it would suit the needs of the sage grouse throughout a variety of winter types. Similarly, if this is unsuitable habitat, it's corridor that the birds have to move through to get between lekking and nesting and winter. So we need to create a corridor there, whether we make that more winter habitat or more nesting habitat, that's up to the constraints of that particular area. So the point here is to look at what the constrictions are based on the sage grouse movement patterns and timing of movement to determine what we want to make that unsuitable habitat into. But the goal is to make it all suitable in one way or another, whether it's through redundancy of habitats or just creating an open corridor that the birds can move through. With that, I'd like to acknowledge all of the help that I got. There's no way that I could do this by myself. The BLM Kanab field office was extremely helpful and critical and crucial to the whole operation. Lisa Church, Carson Gubler, and several other volunteers that came out on a nightly basis to help me get these transmitters on in 2012 and 2013. David Dahlgren gave assistance with transmitter application. And Kevin Heaton, Steve Peterson, Wally Dodds also helped with trapping, expertise in where to find the sage grouse and where to go to do some trapping. And then finally Devin Monroe, who is my technician that's spent countless hours out at night trapping and is the one ground truthing all of the materials. I thank you for your time. If you have any questions, you can please email me at nickifry, NICKI, .frey @usu.edu, or you can call me at 435-586-19 Thank you very much. Have a great day.